All right, welcome everyone. We are here today to have a roundtable talk about advocacy fatigue. My name is Brea Murakami, and I'm the Western Region Rep for the Professional Advocacy Committee. I'm joined today by another PAC committee member, Kaitlin Ridgway. She is the Great Lakes Regional Rep. And we are so excited to have two amazing guests here to have this discussion about advocacy fatigue with. The first guest is Judith Pinkerton, a music therapist, consultant, and online educator who teaches music therapy-based strategies for healthcare settings. Judith was involved in advocating for the first ever music therapy license in the United States in 2011. Our second guest is Dr. Ami Kunimara, a music therapist based in California and Hawaii. Ami is the founder of the Self-Care Institute and recently published her dissertation on a grounded theory of transforming burnout into well-being. So welcome to both of our guests, and thank you so much for having this discussion with us. We have about 3 or 4 questions, and this conversation will last 20 to 25 minutes. So yeah, let's get started. All right, our first question about advocacy fatigue is, how do you identify fatigue, and how frequently does advocacy fatigue impact your work?
You want to go first, Ami?
Sure, I'll go first. Yeah,
Okay.
so with advocacy fatigue, the way it looks, I mean, to me, it really parallels burnout. And when I talk about, I can use burnout as this overarching word with advocacy fatigue, it relates to both occupational burnout and activist burnout. And you know what this looks like to me is disengaging from advocacy efforts, not being able to be an advocate in a proper way. But also there's these like emotions like irritability and resentment sometimes, or this lack of confidence that can sometimes come in. And to me, all of this relates to exhaustion, this exhausting piece that's related to the fatigue, where we get exhausted by our own advocacy efforts, we get exhausted by other people. And that can sometimes, create this change in attitude towards our own profession, towards music therapy, on the worst days, a change in attitude towards our clients, which can sometimes be harmful. But looking at advocacy fatigue as being very related to burnout. And I see that these symptoms can overlap a lot. And, for myself, it's important that I recognize this when it happens, to know that, I'm a human being. I'm going to get irritable at times. I'm going to get frustrated. I'll get tired at times too. And that can be okay. It's not like the end of the world, but it's something to just monitor when it's happening. And Brea, you asked, how often does this happen? For me, advocacy fatigue really comes in waves. And, I'll have a wave of like feeling really motivated and charged and ready and, having the energy, and it can slowly dip down and the fatigue comes in. But, just looking back at like my 15-year career, I can now look back and trust that these will be waves. And just because I hit a wave of fatigue, it doesn't mean I'm going to stay there forever. I'll likely, go out of it. Another wave of motivation will come. But that's the way I personally look at advocacy fatigue. And I see like, it likely will come again. And that can be okay. Each time it comes, I can get better at noticing it and then doing something about it.
That's interesting that you notice like these kind of cycles and that predictability of like, oh, this,
Yeah.
even if you're experiencing some fatigue, it's not necessarily like the dead end necessarily. It's just a sign to maybe step back.
Yes.
Thanks. Judith, how about you?
I agree with the waves. And you have to honor that. There's times when you really do need to pull back, especially if you're doing a lot of advocacy at the state level, because there's just so many working parts that you have to be aware of and attend to, that you just need to give yourself a break. If you notice that you're wanting to disengage, and give yourself the break, because you're not going to do any good, if you're not able to focus, not able to attend when you need to attend. So yeah, wise words. I really don't have a lot to add to that, because I agree with everything that you've said. It was very well said.
Yeah, Judith, if I can ask a follow-up question, especially related to specifically like state advocacy. I know that I've served on one state task force, and so that can be a really long haul. I'm curious, like stepping back from that might not be like, oh, just taking a month or two off of like engaging with professional networks. Do you have any thoughts about stepping back from maybe those longer commitments or advocacy commitments, because that can look on, there can be so many different timescales for that, I imagine.
Yeah, so our our advocacy with the state and getting the license seemed to be like over a really intense 2-year period. And once it was signed by the governor in 2011, I was immediately launching into the next step of, okay, what's next? Oh, we got to write the regs. Because we didn't have the forethought of having a downtime with needing a license to practice. So it was like, as soon as he signed it, we were all out of compliance. None of us had a license.
Oh, that's ironic. Yeah.
So whoops, I forgot about that part with the attorneys when we were writing the bill. So then it was immediately getting into that and getting the regs done, and then taking a break because there was a request of making sure the Department of Education also had everything in place so that music therapists could work in school districts. And it took me a couple of years actually before I was looking around going, somebody else can carry this one. I don't need to carry this one. And nobody was doing it. So it took me, because I knew that it was going to be some momentum, just figuring out who to go to, who to engage if we started getting some, feedback. And I'll never forget the one email that I got from the chair of this one department who said the wrong thing to me. And I got behind closed doors, I got really pissed and decided it was time to call in my senator champion. And it immediately went through then. But it's like I can go so far in advocating, understanding, wanting to, figure out, where do we work? Where do we not work? All this. And then when she said something just really stupid, that's when I was done. It's like, okay, this is it. I'm bringing in the senator. And he will take care of everything. And he did. He came in and basically they didn't want to lose their friendship with him because he was chair of the education committee for the Senate. And so they paid attention to what he said, and it went through, and they adopted regulations of the Department of Education. And so everything is fine. But, I try to minimize those people that really matter in advocacy so that when you need them, they know that their power will come in and make everything fine. So it's really choosing wisely who you use along the advocacy trail in order to support efforts so that they're feeling honored, and their timing and the time amount that they have available, all of that is quite the mix in that. So I don't know if I answered your question. I kind of did a circuitous way of looking at how advocacy works for me.
I think that's a great reminder to lean on the advocates that are alongside you, because it probably you shouldn't be like the only person in a given situation. So yeah, that's definitely answered the question. And that's actually related to our second question. So the Professional Advocacy Committee has put out a few polls to prepare for this discussion in our Facebook group. And so one of our questions, we asked the music therapists in the Professional Advocacy Facebook group, with whom do you feel like there's the most friction or struggle when advocating? And our poll results said that 61% of music therapists reported that they feel the most advocacy fatigue when communicating with coworkers or other professionals. Can you share a time when you shifted a coworker's thinking about music therapy, and what do you feel was responsible for that positive change?
Can I jump in?
Yeah.
Go for it.
Okay. when I was really working intensely with addiction treatment centers, residential, the way that I would advocate was to honor other therapists and to let them know how significant they were with the patients or clients that I was working with. And so I would purposefully seek them out or email them about a particular client and their reaction and saying, hey, just giving you a heads up, this is going on. I recommended that they talk to you about XYZ. And so I was building relationship with them purposefully, always advocating about what happened in music therapy. So they're aware of what the circumstances were that brought out this issue that I thought that they could then carry on, because they're always looking for ways that they can better support their patients or clients. And so I build that relationship with them so that they're like, ooh, well, tell me more, because I would find that they would come into session and want to see what I do. And so invariably, I was always having students, nursing students, counseling students from the local universities, as well as other therapists coming in to observe what I'm doing. I still remember the CEO coming in wanting to, see what the heck she's doing in here. And I totally ignore them. I'm there for the clients, and we go through whatever the session plan is. And I just find that the more that you can engage them with what you're doing and really treat them as a team member and yourself as a team member, that it resulted in me getting an advocacy film that had the clinical director and 2 therapists on film talking about the importance of the music therapy program.
Mm. Those are so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I saw you nodding a lot as well. Do you mind sharing?
I resonate that with it so much. Beautifully said, Judith. And I agree, I feel like my success in advocacy in my clinical workspaces have come sort of in normal clinical, like everyday interactions with my coworkers. And advocacy doesn't always have to mean like, giving this big presentation sometimes, but sometimes it's in a treatment team meeting. And like you said, Judith, like really making sure you're part of that team and, holding your ground there and sharing what happens during your sessions. And even like, my own charting and writing notes, like that's advocacy too, writing down what happens in my sessions. But I've found the biggest advocacy for music therapy, or the biggest advocates, can be my own clients, where when they're talking about the work, it can be received a lot different to my coworkers than me talking about my own work. And, I think we've all had, those handful of clients who just are really impacted by music therapy for whatever reason. Maybe they're a musician or a creative person, but music therapy somehow became that modality that really created a transformation in their treatment. And those are the clients that can become, the biggest advocates and the most enjoyable to work with too. And so again, in these normal clinical moments, whether it's just charting or chatting with coworkers or, official treatment team meeting or talking to doctors. But yeah, Judith, I love what you said, but really, treating ourselves as a very important part of the team. And in that way, we can also look at maybe advocacy isn't doing like a whole lot of extra things on top of our normal work, because just our own clinical work, like that can be enough sometimes at the end of the day of what we have energy for. But making sure that our own clinical work is recognized and using our own voices. And one thing I wanted to mention is I have been blessed with very supportive coworkers. I haven't encountered a lot of resistance in the clinical space. Most of my clinical work has been in California. That probably has a lot to do with it, where music therapy is a very sought out modality. But for me, my biggest advocacy efforts have been within my own family and culture. And that's where I've had to do a lot of explaining of what music therapy is, really advocating for it being like, a real profession, that I am a healthcare professional and, can make a salary and a good living, and that it's a real job. Like all that has happened within my own family, which has brought up certain frustrations and personal issues, but these are things worth addressing. And that for me has been the biggest challenge when it comes to advocacy, but yet it has given me a lot of practice for the outside world too, when I do need to advocate outside of my family or culture. But I just wanted to mention that because a lot of music therapists I've talked to, that has been the case too. And for a lot of us, we are the first music therapists in our own family, in our own lineage, or the first one to, study this field. And that can sometimes mean we're starting to walk a new path that hasn't been walked in our own in our own families. And when something's unfamiliar, sometimes it's rejected at first, which is something I experienced. And I just want to put that out there in case anyone else is experiencing that, to know that you're not alone. But for me, I find some joy and excitement in being sort of a pioneer and feeling like I'm doing something different. I love that feeling, but it does come with challenges at the same time. And although it can create, some challenges in my own relationships, those are areas for growth too. And, when you ask that question, like, shifting a coworker's thinking, like for me, it wasn't necessarily a coworker, but it was like my parents, like, trying to, over the years, having them recognize that, oh yeah, like Ami is doing something good out there. And their thinking about music therapy has shifted over the years. And now they're able to talk about it the way I do. And, I feel like that's one of my biggest accomplishments too, is not just my clinical work, but, my own personal development in being able to do something different and within my own family, and then eventually have it recognized, and using that as a place where I could, then build my relationship with my family, even when it was hard at first.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great point. I also, the thing you were saying about like, just there's been a change over the last like decade or so, I've noticed that as well. I feel like when I first graduated from my music therapy coursework in 2011, that like a lot fewer people had even heard of the term music therapy. And so I think like first cycle me in my 20s, I felt like I would get so defensive, like, oh, this is so amazing. Why don't you understand? And reflecting back when I would talk to other professionals or my friends and family, I think like if I saw a video of myself giving that elevator speech, like I was probably coming off like really defensive or like more aggressive than I had meant to. And so I hopefully current me is more like welcoming and just like celebrating all uses of music within our own scopes of practice, like you were talking about, Judith. And I think that putting that pressure on like, oh, that extra elevator speech that you're giving has been really helpful for me to communicate maybe with less friction with other professionals or coworkers or family members. Kaitlin, I wanted to have you jump in if you had any other thoughts on this topic or question.
Yeah, it just makes me think both of you are kind of pointing out kind of work smarter, not harder when it comes to the workplace. And really like empowering those people around you to do the advocacy is such an important piece that you all brought up, whether it's empowering the clients to kind of show that benefit in themselves or your coworkers. I noticed a big thing for myself, I work in hospice. So there's a variety of, especially since the pandemic, there's been a variety of staff members through the years coming through. And the biggest thing I can do is empower the people around me. So when I do like in-services or things like that, just kind of getting the like telling them what gives me a good referral coming from the social worker or the nurse or even our physician on our team, and having them be the ones kind of empowered to talk about it more. So then in turn in the community, they're able to talk about it more. And I found that helps a lot. And then I'm not on the spot to be always the one giving definitions of what I am and what I'm doing. So
Thank you. All right. I jumped a little bit ahead, but our third question is, what tips do you have for music therapists who feel defensive when others don't understand what music therapy is all about, because often that can take up a lot of like our emotional energy, leading to maybe that fatigue or burnout if it keeps going down the line. So any thoughts from anyone on the chat about that?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I try to do is to find out what they do know, and start with that rather than what they don't know. And it's more empowering for them to be able to talk about what they do know. So, thinking about that elevator speech when you just have them for, 30 seconds in an elevator. When somebody says, "Oh, well, what's music therapy?" Or is it this or is it that? I try to find out what their interest is. Are they thinking of their grandparents or their parents that are aging, or are they thinking of their child that has autism, or they're thinking of a neighborhood kid that, whatever. So I try to find out what they're thinking about, because as we know, music therapy is so broad, I mean, it could take a lot of energy and time to talk about the breadth of what we offer. So I try to hone it down to find out what they're interested in, get them to talking about it. And then I might add a piece of, well, yes, that. And then this is what would be added onto that to actually make it music therapy. And then may talk about, the schooling and all that's involved. And then they're just like, whoa, I had no idea that. Where can I find out more information? Then I can easily then steer them to musictherapy.org for a lot more information. But yeah, I like to start off with what they already know and then build on that.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people have some kind of story about like a time when music was like a time machine for them, or a family member who had a musical breakthrough or something like that. So that's a great tip. Anyone else?
Yeah, that word defensiveness is still like sitting with me. And like you, Brea, I can reflect back and see, certain times where I was advocating from a place of defensiveness and like just really trying to convince somebody of like what I knew inside of me. And sometimes I'll still get that feeling of like, it's like that feeling, oh, I just want to change somebody's mind, or, oh, they're wrong and I'm right. And if I can only just tell them this, or, and now the way I approach that, because I look back at the defensiveness can be very draining when we feel that. And what we can automatically do in a state of defensiveness is try to convince someone to believe what we're believing. However, this convincing, I feel that approach, someone else can feel that, or we can feel that too. When someone else is trying to convince us of something and we become skeptical, like, oh, I'm not sure, I'm going to think on that. And so now when I feel that defensiveness, I try to check myself and think of, taking a breath and saying, okay, instead of trying to convince someone or change their mind right away, my job in advocacy is education. And that's all, is to present some information to them. And what they do with that is going to be their responsibility. And now I can have my own desires, I can have my own expectations, but really coming from a more educational sort of mind frame creates more openness. And I feel like the other person I'm communicating with can feel that, of me just sharing information rather than trying to like energetically tug on them to like get them over to my side. And, information can be so powerful, and knowing that, in any given moment, information can be a seed that's planted within someone that they can reflect on and can be a starting place for them to start to understand something. Or for someone else, education and information can be something that unlocks an understanding. And either way, that gives us something to work with. But I also love what you said, Judith, about, also trying to communicate with what a person knows already and going through their own connection to music, whatever that might be, and building on that instead of coming from this place of just trying to convince them right away, because that can be just exhausting for us as music therapists, and for the other person, it might not feel that good either. So that's just one thing I've been keeping in mind. But again, that defensiveness feeling, that can be a place for reflection when that does happen. It can be a place again to take a breath and say, oh, like, why is this happening? Likely that means something's being triggered inside, whether it's like feeling misunderstood or feeling frustrated or feeling unheard or, mislabeled or something else. And likely that's related to some type of bigger issue in life, or something we've been trying to work on that's even doesn't have anything to do with music therapy, but that can be a point of personal growth and a point of personal reflection too.
Yeah, actually, when you were saying that and that, like, oh, it's their responsibility to do with the information and education what they will, I actually had an insight. I was like, oh, I think like in my first cycle defensive advocacy, Brea, I think I was thinking something like, oh, if I don't speak eloquently enough and like get them on my side or the music therapy team or something, that means I'm a bad music therapist or my work is not as valuable. And already I'm like, oh, that's not a rational thought. Those are separate things. So great. All right, we have 1 more minute left, so we're going to do a quick round version of our last question. If everyone wouldn't mind sharing just 1 or 2 things, what helps recharge your advocacy energy? Kaitlin, maybe do you mind starting us on that one?
Sure. I'll go. I actually got onto this committee because I was feeling a lot of fatigue and advocating. So that was one step of recharge. The other thing I think is just kind of connecting with other music therapists, knowing that I'm not alone in, those kinds of advocacy. Advocacy is always going to be there, I think, in our profession. So reaching out to others that are feeling those same things has always been helpful.
Great. Thank you. Ami, your answer for
I was
recharge?
going to say the same thing, Kaitlin. It's connecting with music therapists. I mean, what's happening right now, it just feels good to be in a Zoom room with all of you. And connection can happen in so many different ways these days. It can be virtual, it can be in person. I mean, we have conferences, but you can even, have your music therapy friends you can text once in a while. But feeling a connection to my music therapy community is what it's going to sustain me, because exactly what you said, Kaitlin, realizing that we do not have to do this alone. Advocacy is not something we shoulder on our own as individuals. We shoulder this as a community together.
Thanks. And Judith, we'll close with your tips.
I utilize music. Seriously. In a variety of ways, whether it's music making or music listening and using it in a specific way, following the Music for Life music medicine protocol, but music to recharge, to build that resilience that you bounce back no matter what pretty quickly. In addition to everything else everybody else said, it's not just that alone, but yeah, that one more piece.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, because that's what often got us into the work that we're doing in the first place. So great. All right. Well, thank you again, everyone. Yeah, we're going to be sharing this with the larger music therapy community. And so again, thank you for sharing your expertise, personal experiences, and thoughts.
Thank you both so much for joining us.
Hi, I'm Maggie Connors, co-chair of the Professional Advocacy Committee. Thank you for joining us today for our discussion. We hope you found it helpful. The Professional Advocacy Committee would love to hear your thoughts and ideas on this and future topics as we continue our series. Please feel free to reach out to us over social media or by email at amtaprofessionaladvocacy@gmail.com with your ideas. We are also available to help with advocacy concerns, so please reach out to us about those as well. Thank you for your time and advocacy efforts. We appreciate everything you do for music therapy.